Now let's get it all in perspective. And Michael Dunn's crosshairs, they shooting, all made you look. You a slave to a page in your stand your ground law book, but you're not attacking. Yes, you are. If you have melanin, you are a living weapon. Although a child that justifies you being followed like Twitter, triceps and biceps alone make you armed until candy and soda. Unarmed, you really are my Negro. It's murder music when you pump up the volume. The media got the keys to your humanity, yet you don't know my name. They call you loud music murder. Peace and love, South Carolina Progressive Network, friends and family. Welcome to When Push Comes to Shove with the sub question of or statement why we can't all just get along. Basically, it's a town hall of friends, families, allies, just people who wanted to check in after the significant verdict for Minneapolis this week and George Floyd's murder, and also a speedy 2021 that started the year off with an insurrection in the Capitol, a transition in leadership and mass shootings and what have you. So we just wanted to hold a safe circle for our loved ones and beloved community to be able to check in about what's important to everybody here in this circle. Talk about some of the local things that we can do to really get busy and transform our society. But for the most part, this is just about that humanity check-in for our people. So I will pass it. My name's Omari. I'm a field organizer with the network. I've been with the network since 2015. I'm a Jessica School graduate and co-chair the C4. And I will pass it to my NLP New Legacy brother, Wayne Borders, who's co-hosting with me. Just check in, let the people know who you are. So.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Wayne Borders. As Omari mentioned, one of the co-founders of the New Legacy Project. Been with the network since at least about 2012. One of the go-to organizers and just working class Joe. So tonight, so we wanted to pose that question, why can't we all just get along? And talk to you about how everybody is feeling, what everybody is thinking in terms of how do we use this small victory? Well, not a small victory, it's a big victory, but it's almost a speed bump, you know, and on the way to where we really want to be with police not killing Black children, Black men and women. So we'll go ahead and move it down the line, do some introductions. Rick?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead.
I'm Rick Padalunas. I'm the Progressive Network member since probably 2012, something like that. Majeska School graduate. I'm in Myrtle Beach, so I'm the hinterlands. I'm far away from you guys. I'm far away from Columbia. I sometimes get to Columbia, but out here in the hinterlands, I try and keep connected. And one thing that I'm working on here locally is helping Grand Strand Action Together work on their redistricting, the gerrymandering effort. They're part of the Fair Maps kind of umbrella, and we've been planning for a while. We've been doing this for over a year now, and trying to get community contacts and try and making a little bit of progress of organizing with other groups in the area, and right now trying to raise the money to be able to do further outreach.
All right, thanks for that, Rick. Is there any other network leadership in the building that wants to check in and give a few words before we delve into the program?
Hi, my name is Carol Singletary. I am co-chair of C4. I have been a part of the network since about 2015. I too am a Majeska school graduate. I just want to hear what was going on tonight. I'm sure I'll have some feedback, but just want to hear.
All right. Thank you. And Vince Matthews, policy director, been with the network since 2017, and joining in on the conversation. Clearly, there are many policy implications as they all relate to these issues in this time. And so any discussion pertaining to that is always good to participate in. So here for that.
All right, welcome. I see my mentor, Dr. Frank C. Martin, in the building. Want to check in with any words or just some quick reflections about this year thus far, recent events?
Well, how's everyone doing? That may be a rhetorical question. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and people can't gather and talk to each other in person easily. We can now that the vaccines start to move out, but I think things will get better. Yeah, I'm Frank Martin, and this year has been revelatory in a very short period. We're just ending April, and so much has been revealed about the infrastructure of our culture and history that it's very sobering, and it's also, I think, quite fascinating. But just to go directly into the wording of the title for our event, why can't we all just get along? Or what was it? Why we can't all just get along. It states in the title this supposition that we can't get along. And the fact of the matter is, in a democratic society, people are always going to have disparate views. There will always be disagreement. The problem isn't always necessarily perhaps about getting along. Maybe the problem is more about how we behave when we don't get along. And that might be something to shape the discourse around. And I think I'll stop with that.
All right, appreciate it. I see Robert John in the circle. Any check-in? How you feeling, brother?
Hey, my friends. Hey, I'm Robert John. 2 words, 1 name. It's very Southern, very sexy. So yeah, I wanted to come through too, because I was also struck, as Dr. Martin was, with the title. And so it made me, I wanted to talk also not about why we can't, something can happen, but what happens when we're not in principal struggle together? What happens when we start to meet at a different point? And and I just wanted to hear people's takebacks and all that good stuff. Again, I'm on Congaree lands in West Columbia, and I'm a queer abolitionist, always ready to throw down in the dirty. So I'll bump it up to whoever else wants to share.
All right, welcome, family. Anyone else? I see our BBM ally, April Richardson. Would you like to say any words? All right, I will come back to you, April. Tom.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Mabel.
And hey, everyone, and I apologize for being off screen, trying to do multiple things at once. But my name is April Richardson. I am the South Carolina coordinator with Black Voters Matter. And really, happy to be in this space to just have a sense of camaraderie. This week has been, I think, a lot for everyone, and it's just kind of nice to come together, and definitely always hyped to meet new people that are a part of this struggle and find new ways to collaborate. So just really excited to listen, to hear, and just thankful to be in this collaborative space.
All right, appreciate you. Tom, would you like to check in?
Yeah, I just want to find out what you all are talking about and what ideas you have that might be useful.
Yes, we will find out. Thank you for joining. A new ally that I just recently met, I see Lamisha, am I saying that right?
Hey, Omari, good to be on. It's Lamisha, but feel free to call me LA. The rest of the community does. So just thank you for the invite. I'm in North Carolina. I'm from North Carolina and based in North Carolina, and just was really honored to meet Omari earlier today, and just really grateful to be on the call in solidarity. And just really wanted to be in the community. I have family that's in Greer, South Carolina, and Spartanburg, and I lived in Sumter for 4 years. So it's just really good. I feel like to be amongst new family. We're in North Carolina. We're dealing with, unfortunately, we lost another community member to state sexual violence 24 hours after the trial ended. And so a lot of us are, I'm off camera now because we're coordinating a lot of resources for folks that are up in Elizabeth City, and just preparing for what this weekend might be for us, and who will be arrested and who will need to be bailed out, and just kind of facing those realities. So thanks for having the space, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely, welcome. And I believe our final check-in, if you wish, our rural SC project. You'd like to just let us know how you're feeling?
Hi, I want to say thanks to April Richardson. I saw this in an email that she sent out. And as most people have said before, the title is what struck me. And I'm Krista Williams, by the way. And I like a caption that you had in there about what happens after the struggle, what happens after the protest. Can we all sit down at the table and actually try to resolve the issues and be honest about where these issues are stemming from in coming to that resolution? So very interested in the topic and the discussion, and thank you all again for inviting us.
Absolutely, welcome. So I'll give a little context to the title and probably that opening art verse with the news clip that we showed. I believe the Rodney King beating was 1991. And one of his famous quotes was, "Can't we all just get along?"
Yeah, I think it was 92.
The verdict was in 92, but I think the actual.
Yeah, it happened in 91, right.
And I was watching Spike Lee's Malcolm X recently, and that's the opening clip, and it kind of has some narration over it. Certainly the Chauvin verdict, the young man in Chicago, I'm forgetting names. When we came up with the program, we were standing at like 147 mass shootings. And in the title, you'll see insert victim here. So I was really thinking about Stop Asian Hate, and calling it the Wuhan virus, and just all these kind of things pitting and otherizing everybody against each other. And we wanted to kind of maybe juxtapose the verdict with what could be possible, which was officer intervening to stop a chokehold, which could have possibly ended like George Floyd's murder. So just any number of things around why we can or can't get along. And certainly in the network, we believe in collective wisdom. We certainly have our kind of hardline strategies of how we like to do business, but everybody in the circle offers wisdom. And we want to certainly leave with the opportunity to check in, but also a toolkit. So if anybody has resources or just ways that they move in the community, certainly drop it in the chat, and everybody make sure you save it so that we can all expand our collective wisdom, as a team. I put a few points of potential conversation. Wayne, did you see anything maybe that I should have included? And then certainly to the circle, if you feel like there's something that you want to touch on, add it in the chat, and then we can just have our conversation.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Wayne.
So I think centering that story of Cariel and her situation with her colleague and her saving that man, and and now, the city having instituted that duty to act, I think that's something that we possibly should start with. I believe the state of New York actually has passed now Carriel's law, where it is state law now that an officer must intervene when they see a colleague committing an act of excessive force. And that also has me thinking a little bit too about this new bill, well, not so much a new bill, but a revisited bill that Tim Scott put forward back towards the end of the Trump administration. And, his colleagues weren't going to take that anywhere. But now we're in a situation where with Cory Booker and House member, if I recall correctly, Karen Bass, they're now starting like initial talks about taking that piece of legislation that Tim Scott wrote and retooling it so that it might have the ability to pass. And so that duty to act is what I think I would like for us to center first and speak on, because we as citizens and community members and leaders, we too have a duty to act. Like I said, it was wonderful to see this legal victory, but it certainly is not enough, and it sure is not going to be the thing that sets off truly us restoring justice to our peoples and to our communities. And so in our own ways, I'd like for us to think about what are some actions that we could take, what are some things that we could work on potentially within our communities. And if community members are already having some of those discussions about next steps. And so I'll open that to whoever would like to chime in.
All right, we have a topic, the duty to act. Anybody want to chime in?
Yeah, comparing that to when you saw the tape of Chauvin, the video of him with his knee on George Floyd, what struck me, after we get to the recent verdict, what struck me is the other officers that just stood there. They didn't do anything. They didn't try and stop it. They didn't do anything. They talked to the people on the sidewalk. And it really struck me that they didn't have a moral obligation. They didn't feel anything inside of themselves to do anything. And this part is going to sound really strange, but because it's a comedy show, and I don't mean to lighten the tone, but at the end of the Seinfeld series, they were arrested as being public citizens for not doing anything. They called it the Good Samaritan law. I don't know if there is such a thing anyplace, but that comparison that the other officers nothing happened to them, and they could just stand there and do nothing. And so I understand the idea of trying to legislate things, to create a law, and it may be necessary, but I don't know how much that changes minds. If it changes the minds of the other officers that are standing there not doing anything, because their moral compass doesn't tell them to do anything even when they're standing there. That's a really hard thing to articulate. I'm just trying to articulate my emotions when I was watching that. But that's what struck me. I hadn't seen this CBS report before, and I was not aware of what happened in Buffalo. I might have read it and I forgot about it. But she really took a stand. She did something, and she also paid a really heavy price for that. And so the legislation trying to make a law is a step. It's a step forward. But the state violence, the structural racism is just so embedded into the system that I'm kind of frustrated and I've been around for many, many years, and it's really tough to see if there can be any progress.
Any other thoughts?
Omari, this is Krista Williams. To tag on to what Rich says, I work in the field of corrections. Me and some of my friends had that same discussion, and one perspective to look at it from, being inside of the field is with those other officers. I believe Chauvin was a lieutenant. Am I correct? I think he was a lieutenant. In the field, that wall of blue, what that showed me when the other officers did not address Chauvin is, if he's a lieutenant, this is something that is not new. This is something that's been going on. This is something he's done before. This is something that's been accepted. This is something that's been accepted because he's in that position and he's been allowed to do that. And therefore, the lower ranking officers up under him don't want to challenge that. That's what I saw. I don't know if that was the case in this particular instance, but in those professions where you have that wall of silence or that code, and as Rick said, sometimes there's racial discrimination that goes on within these departments, that are discrimination on different levels, that allow certain individuals to get away with certain things that others can't. And when that happens behind closed doors and these things manifest themselves in the public, it's kind of, well, he's always been allowed to get away with this. I don't want to challenge that. I don't want to be blackballed. I don't want to be, because since this has happened, we've seen recently where an officer actually, a deputy, resigned out of his position and, was a whistleblower against the police department. So there could be an issue of some of the officers having some moral compass issues, or some of them have been allowed, seeing certain individuals in authority allowed to get away with something, and it's become a norm for them, and they don't challenge it. I don't know if I'm making sense, but that's kind of what I saw in the video too.
Well, I think it made perfect sense because there was a hierarchy of command there. And I don't know what Chauvin's rank was, but I know he was the ranking officer. And I think one of the people was a trainee. And so there was reluctance to challenge him. In the Carriole case, I think she challenged the officer. She actually was involved in a fist fight at the scene for controverting the actions of another officer, even though the actions were wrong. And in relation to the Good Samaritan's law, there is such a law, which is really about rendering aid to a person in distress and being left free of liability in case you assist somebody on the side of the road. If somebody faints in their car and drives off the road, and you help them out of their car, and it turns out that they've got a broken arm, you pull them out of the car, you didn't break the arm, but did you do more harm? They can't sue you for trying to help them. But the problem is in part the training and the culture in law enforcement, that it has a militarized structure, because people do have to perform in emergency situations on orders. This is not a defense, but I'm just saying that there are certain situations in which you may need a law enforcement officer to act with deadly force to protect citizens. Now, is that authorization because if you become a law enforcement officer, you're authorized to carry a gun, you're authorized to carry a taser, you're authorized to take certain kinds of actions to constrain other people's movements. So with those authorizations come great responsibilities, with underpay, insufficient mental health care, and a whole series of other problems. So who is doing that work? Remember, Derek Chauvin had a number of complaints, I think 17 complaints in his 20-year career, and he was continuing to work, the question would be why? So what was the culture supporting him in his inadequacy in dealing with the public? And why was it not questioned more? So all of those are issues, which is why I take the view that's been advocated by, I can't remember, Ayanna Pressley and a couple of other people who were saying that this is not justice, but it is accountability in this instance. What would justice look like? Justice would have looked like preventing George Floyd's death by other police officers having enough empathy to intervene without worrying that they were going to be censured because they saved someone's life. That would be approaching justice. So that's about trying to develop methods to support police and law enforcement officials in doing their jobs well in terms of protecting citizens. And the other thing that the public should start to think about is, well, for example, with Makia Brandt, who was just murdered, a 15 or 16-year-old girl who was defending herself in front of her own, where she was living. And the officer comes, does not get a clear assessment of the situation. She's holding a knife and she's just killed. She's not tased. There's no effort to question or call her attention to what's going on. She's just shot. So if she had been a blonde, blue-eyed, 125-pound Caucasian girl, would the same thing have happened? I don't think it would have. I don't think there's a world in which that would have happened in that way, no matter what the circumstances were, but especially not if she'd been defending herself against two assailants who also happened to be African American. So there are a lot of cultural considerations that are occurring in these situations that are embedded in how our culture has taught us to interact. So those are deep dives that have to be addressed on so many levels in terms of education, in terms of law enforcement culture, in terms of engagement with these systemic challenges. And back to the theme that Omari proposed, why can't we all just get along? Well, we can't all just get along because in a society where we have intelligent people with different points of view and different aims, we're not going to get along all the time. That's not going to happen. So the question is, how are we structuring our behavior when we don't get along? Because we're just not going to get along. It's impossible for that to be what is going to ever happen with everyone. So in a free society where you have certain kinds of rights that you are supposedly designated with because of being a citizen, or if you're not a citizen, then how are you going to be treated also as a consideration? Because if you're at the border, are you being treated humanely? But if you're a citizen, how can you have those rights protected? How can you be certain that law enforcement is always going to consider your humanity? Those are the questions that have to be put before police departments, before the culture of policing, and before all of the things that are in it. And when I think it was Crystal that talked about the hierarchy, that's real. That's real. So the person in charge in those situations is going to be a moral compass for the other officers. So that's training. And
kind of picking up on that too, because yes, the police department's chief typically would be the one to dictate and help construct the policies of the department, but also two, what role as well, and kind of tying these things, redistricting and our lawmakers into this as well. Where is their humanity? Where is their empathy and their consideration for reimagining what those police department policies might be as well? Because there are some, 18,000 different departments in the country. it's not a federal system. It's mostly state and county organized and run and, you know, oversawn. So how do we, so again, how do we bring those people into the role of helpers in this situation when we also, in some ways, have to fight them? So.
The
I'm sorry.
question would be, is if it's localized, do you want some form of federal oversight? Because it's likely that the police departments in various states will have to be localized because they're being funded probably at the state level and the local municipal level. So, but then must there be federal oversight for their training? Might be a question. And so those are the kinds of aims that organizations like this would have to decide on, to aim for legislation that will protect larger numbers of citizens, that will help transform the police culture. And it has to be transformed from top down and from bottom up. It has to go in both directions because of what you just said, how many different departments there are in so many different parts of the country. The police department in New York City and the police department in a country town in New York outside of, you know, Poughkeepsie is going to be different from a police department in Atlanta or the one in Bowman, South Carolina. So all those things are considerations when you're trying to think of what legislative solutions are possible. It would have to be taken into consideration.
And who was trying to chime in as well?
That was me, Robert John. So I agree with everything that Dr. Martin is saying, but I think fundamentally, the issue I'm having is that the conversation of reform isn't a real conversation. When we talk about reforming the police, we actually embolden the police. One thing we don't have is participatory budgets, where we don't know how much money when we talk about like in our counties and our municipalities, how much the police actually get, and that they can get in contracts with federal government to support like 287G, which allows them to be ICE agents and then creates then more federal money to come in. The other thing, I did not watch the George Floyd video. I only read them, and I haven't watched any video of any Black person or brown person dying since Tamir Rice of 2012, because I refuse to participate in any more Black pain or Black sorrow, or allow the media to project this violent pornography around Black and brown death. But reading it and reading as it was happening, the transcript, what it did struck me is thinking about the trials of Norman Berg and how all these Nazi officers were saying, I was just following orders. I was just following orders. Regardless of what was presented, regardless of what was happening, everybody was just following orders. So the problem with policing is that it is always going to just follow orders. And the problem with the legislation is you're trying to legislate morality. You're trying to legislate people to do a good thing, and that's not going to happen. And the system in itself isn't allow you to happen because you're going to have to follow hierarchy. There is a chain of command, and it is there for a purpose so that you don't disrupt the system. So I think the problem is the system. It is policing. The problem is that there has to be, in 2019, you could not talk about defunding. In 2021, people talk about defunding because they saw a shift. The confluence of anger and pain happened with the American uprising in the summer of 2020. You saw people going to the streets to battle for their livelihood. And part of the question that struck me was talking about the people go out to march for the hell of it. No, I think people are living in hells. They're feeling the oppression around legislating their bodies and their identities. They see the impression that when they walk out the door, they may not come home. So it's not, so they're experiencing hell. I think another part of the question was like, I'm messing it up, but the other question I think at the end was like, you know, or do people want to turn up, I guess? Do people just want to turn up? No, people are tired. And this is the last course of action. You know, Fannie Lou Haber told us, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? So at some point it breaks, and at some point people are going to react. And then what happens after the protest? I think that question has to be divvied up to different groups of people, right? There is a group of people like our cis white gender folk who have a lot of extra privileges. They have an extra kind of work they have to do at the end of the protest that is their responsibility. It is those of us who are light-skinned passing or white passing, who are masculine passing or can pass in certain other spaces. It is our responsibility to hold those lines in those spaces. So we all have roles to do. And getting along isn't to me as important as respecting. You don't gotta like me. You ain't gotta fucking deal with me, but we are gonna have respect. And we are gonna, I apologize for the 4-letter words. That's kind of how I roll sometimes too. But we are going to have to learn to deal with each other's differences. And I want everybody to come with their differences. In the right, in the conservative right, they need to be uniform. You have to be molded to a certain type, and not in my community, not for my people. I want you to come with all your jagged edges. I want you to come with all your incomplete and broken pieces, because I don't want it vanilla. So I want it kinky. So that's what I want. And I want all of us to come together. And that's how we figure out what we need to do. So yeah, I'm thinking of like Ella Baker. I'm thinking of like our ancestors who did that work through base building, to relationship building, who crossed barriers, who lifted up, to Miss Majeska. That I had privilege to be at her house when I was a young little shorty and be able to be in relationship with her through my family. I'm thinking of those folks who said we can circumvent the systems that are in front of us because we don't live binary lives. So it doesn't have to be the policing in the way that we see it. We can think of defunding it and thinking of having different folks that operate in our communities to keep us safe, to keep us healthy. And we spend a lot of our budget on policing and militarizing for this concept of protect and serve. And we see state sanctioned violence kills us and kills us in all kinds of ways. So I think, yeah, we can't legislate morality. We have to talk about ways of how participatory budgets work, how we can, as a community, interrupt that system and be able to move monies into our communities, to feed our communities, to house our community, to care for our community, and not depending, because police don't keep us safe. Housing keeps us safe. Healthcare keeps us safe. Education keeps us safe. Police don't keep us safe. So they don't do pre-crime. So they come in after the fact. So what, or they come in to instigate a situation, just like at Makia's house. Police in 9.6 seconds, that officer got out of the car and was able to put 4 bullets in her chest. Kyle Rittenberg was able to take an AK-47 and cross state line and shoot 2 people and get a bottle of water from a police officer, be able to get in a car and talk to his mama and hold his mama and be gently arrested and taken to prison, and he's alive. So you can't tell me that training all of a sudden drops when you saw a knife, because that training doesn't drop when you see a white boy with a gun. So there is a reality in a different Americas that we all experience. You and all of us experience different Americas. And that's part of this conversation that is not going to be monolithic. We don't all fit in one category. And policing isn't as well, as we just talked about across the board, how different it is. So, but the fundamental problem is policing. So that's what has to be addressed for me. And that's what the work as an abolitionist that I'm doing, but to fundamentally say that the systems were constructed as patriarchal and racist, and for us to reform them means we have to deconstruct them, because we can't reform something that's already broken. It's already imperfect. What next step is to infuse all our brilliance and all our communities and all our space to think about how we can keep each other and our community safe. And that's what's up.
I have to echo.
This is Tom Howell. I have a few comments to make that I think might help with some of the policies and practices that involve the police. I think some of the things that the changes we need to make are already operating very well in other countries. The police in the United States kill more people than police in most other countries that I know of. In Europe, police don't use force as often as American police do. There's far fewer shootings by police in a number of European countries. And in those countries, the police training is much more extensive than it is here. So I think if we study the methods used in Britain and Germany and Finland and some other countries, there's a lot that we can learn that they have already been using for years. In Britain, some of their policies and practices have been in use for nearly 200 years and have worked rather well, and they have far fewer deaths by police in Britain and those other countries than we do. So I suggest we take a look at what's been done in other countries. So not only is the initial training more extensive in some of those countries, but there are more refresher courses on how to solve situations, including situations where the person they need to arrest is armed with a firearm, and they manage to do it without shooting them.
Go ahead, Vince. Unmute.
And agreeing with everything that everyone's saying. And I think one of the key points is that in the context of policy, these issues, I think there needs to be an understanding that the local law enforcement are governed generally, by local entities. And so while there's some discussion on some things that can happen on the federal level, a lot of this really, in terms of solutions, revolve around when we talk about training and response, et cetera. It's about the policies and procedures that are in existence administratively, and also about what types of local laws and regulations and what are the models and things that should be in place to protect the community and address it in the context that it should be. And so for me, there's a couple of things that resonated. One, the concept of first having a specific agenda, i.e. towards the solutions around what we want, because I think there's simple things that have been overlooked and addressed. And we've also seen a pattern in the police over the years. When we look at it historically in terms of like there's the short-term fix and the big-term fix. Systemically, we know we're not going to get a systemic change immediately, but what can we do now? And from that context, if we understand the history, and that's what we're noticing, it's the disparate racial impact in a process that we continue to see to repeat itself. So when I saw the title, "Why Can't We Get Along?" it wasn't just, to me, in the literal context of the current situation, but it was once again a reflection, because I was actually in law school in Los Angeles when the Rodney King incident took place and during the verdict. And it was and ended up going into the space of public defense, criminal defense law, and being right on the context of understanding the intersections of over-policing in communities. What is the lawful use of force? What is excessive use of force? And what we've seen is that whenever there's a policy change, the police tactics change. So you look at, we moved from, when I was in law school, it was the chokehold was litigated and issued. The excessive use, there was Rodney King. And then we shift to now there's shootings. And so there's always some sort of tactic that is used that ends up in this disparate impact happening in the same people, in the same communities in different kinds of ways. And that requires a greater discussion and engagement surrounding what I think is the restorative justice aspect. We have been harmed, communities are harmed, but how is it healed? And how do we move forward in that regard? And so for me, what justice looked like was a need where the police don't have to engage in excessive use of force in the community. These almost in every instance that from which we have been so outraged about was really unnecessary. And so we all know that regardless of what rules or policies are in place, you can't change the hearts and minds of communities. But what we do see is that there's a lack of disconnect and connection between law enforcement and the community, which has often raised another issue about police officers who don't live in the community and have no contact with it, policing them. And so such things as requiring police officers, like in New Jersey, in some states, police officers must be a resident of the town, and not so that you have a tie to the community and know them. And so I think that there needs almost to be like a map of what is the community action plan that communities need to look like on the local level to say, these are the problems that I'm having here on a local level, because it's different in every place. And what are the changes we want to have to make sure that these things aren't happening? And so from these discussions, how do we get to that agenda of what's the next steps? So that history isn't repeating itself, because we know, I hate to say it, something else is going to happen, unfortunately. But hopefully it will not be as egregious, but we know just statistically these things are happening every year. It's just what gets caught and being displayed that brings it to the, the outrageousness to the public eye.
Yeah, I got a few thoughts, especially in 2021. Dr. Martin and I, we hosted a talk called 5.0. And it was kind of a play on 5.0, the police, and what it looks like. We had African-American Deputy Chief of Police, Kelly Head from the Columbia Department, and another officer in the North Region. And in the last week, I believe that Friday after Memorial Day last year was when we held the town hall just to kind of reflect right after that incident. And it was just a really melancholy kind of circle and vibe as expected. And basically everybody was just kind of in reflection mode, just seeing the video and just kind of the shock of what that means, and Chauvin's indifference to George Floyd's life, and just I can't breathe, and just that whole thing. So I think that the tone and the feeling of that circle is just like hyper melancholy. Reflecting back on the museum talk, it's the first time I really saw an incident that kind of took over the nation, where it gave police a chance to check in about what they thought and what they felt. And I kind of would hear it here and there. In a lot of my work, I work with community partnerships and the police resource providers, or a whole host of different partners. So I pretty good punch got my ear to the street about like local feelings from particular officers. But I've never seen where, I wouldn't say across the board, but just a lot of departments and police chiefs had a chance to actually speak out. And I think that speaks somewhat to, I think, Krista's point about rank, and a lot of officers do have feelings and stuff. It's just that they don't want to speak out of pocket as one of the good apples, if you will. And it kind of like the confusion around the title of the program. That's kind of the space that I'm in. Starting the year off with the insurrection and seeing police, being beaten with American flag poles and drugged down the stairs. It was just a mind trip. To Frank's point about the mental health piece, I was on a conversation sometime around June, and I was saying you need to cut the officers' hours, pay them more, and then really build in that mental health and those humanity elements just to keep their own humanity in the work and all the stuff that they got to do. And you'd be surprised, like if there's a heavy incident, it's basically just fill out a report, go home. Maybe they might be able to check in with somebody, but the guy, I guess he was an all lives matter guy. But as soon as I said anything about the humanity of police and funding it, like the health aspects, like he was in total opposition. Like 1 minute he was like, yeah, all the protesters. And then I was like, well, yeah. And I kind of framed my comment around the pandemic and first responders and everybody doing these, 12, 14-hour, 20-hour shifts. And then, so starting the year off, seeing that insurrection, and then waiting on we originally were going to host this program before the verdict, and just to maybe kind of have the jump on if something would have happened, like what we wanted to offer as a possible solution. So that's just kind of me kind of talking out loud in my head around confusion. It's like when do we get a chance to fall back to the humanity of the public servants, especially in a pandemic, to the indifference of Chauvin to George Floyd. And to my understanding, they still do security together. And when I kind of learned a little bit more the context of their relationship, I immediately thought he had a Napoleon complex. So this was like a personal assertion of authority over somebody who made him feel small. You know, and I can't speak for, you know, what he was feeling, but certainly the expression or lack of was just a mind trip in itself, seeing on the video. So a lot of people have asked me just for my advice from being on the front line and being at the protests, being at the State House and stuff. And one thing I would say about the chapters, I've been in 3 different Black Lives Matter chapters since Ferguson. And there's a lot of internal work and healing work that I think organizers have to do in order to be that energy and empath for others. Because basically something happens, we get triggered, and then I think we wind up defaulting to attacking the nearest person. And I've seen like so many potential movements die from the splintering and the fragmentation, where we say like that unified front, and then it winds up being just intergenerational, binary, otherizing and all that within the group. And I hear like the healing word a lot, but I think that it has to be something that you do with purpose. You know, certainly police need to do that kind of work, but I think organizers and people who are out there in the field, you know, or as far as a toolbox or a tactic, I do think we got to have like dedicated therapists and healers and people who can really help people, yoga, just whatever it is, to get away from this traumatic energy. Because working around it, the most well-intentioned person, it's still going to cause disease at some point in some form or fashion. And that's kind of been like my space, you know, in doing the work, is like how can the internal shift and the healing happen in individuals? How can we manifest that at the micro levels, and then how do we make that work across the intersections? And then how does it manifest, you know, on a more holistic scale in a visual way? So I just kind of meandered through that thought, but that's just kind of been my reflection, is just the mind trip of, you know, just insurrection, murder on the day of the verdict. It's like we don't have a resting point to just even feel relief from the verdict, you know, and then it's like on to the next one.
Well, if I follow up on you made a point about the, you know, the police, and you know, I think you were describing, you know, humanizing the police to some extent, and the comment earlier, I think was from Tom Howell, about the difference between the U.S. and Europe. It's not just a matter of training. It's I don't know what the, you know, police or military or whatever is in effect in Europe, what they're, you know, how they're treated, what their economic standing. But if it's like educators, like teachers in Europe, they make a livable salary. You know, they have health insurance. They have free university. It's the whole structure, the welfare state in Europe is very different than it is in this country. In this country, the education is underfunded, and so teachers struggle. They use their own money. Police departments are underfunded, and to some extent, you get what you pay for. So if you are only going to treat these people in the lifestyle you provide them. If you're only going to treat them like the bottom, of society, well, that's what you're going to get. And it will not attract the so-called best and brightest. So part of this approach might be, to try and I'm trying to understand and be able to explain in communities and help organize so that there is more of a public aspect to these things, a public aspect, a communal aspect to public service. Whether it's the police, whether it's educators, whether it's the garbage man, whether it's the mailman, people who are the front, the people who kept things going during the pandemic, and they're still keeping things going. But, you see commercials, oh, they're heroes, and they, talk about this person and that person, but throughout it all, they might have got a bonus here and there, but then they're going to come out of that and they're still going to be, workers at the bottom of the economic structure. And that's a much bigger thing to address than, the policing in communities. But the policing in communities is part of that structure that sits on the public service.
Well, people should think about the fact that in Germany, police officers trained for 3 years. In America, they train for 3 months, maybe 4. And that's going to show you part of the disparity. So the standard of behavior is going to be radically different. And the concern about who is engaged in that profession is radically different. And then you also have the structures for pay. But I'm thinking that what is probably needed in America would be a kind of 2-tiered police force. The difficulty is, how would you know who to call? Because you need some people who are healthcare workers and psychologists, you need some people who are social workers, and sometimes you do need someone who is an actual law enforcement officer. The problem is you're sending the same people to do too many things, because again, this is usually due to local budgets, and I don't know if they're really shortfalls, but it's what is allocated for the social responsibilities that must be accomplished. And America is not really very strong on its social responsibilities. It doesn't provide good programming often for childcare, for healthcare. So this is a major cultural shift that has to happen. It's starting, but there are a lot of people who have to be convinced. And I thought I saw Lamisha with her hand up a moment ago. I'm sorry.
LA, go ahead if you had something.
Oh, sure. I was enjoying the conversation and have agreed with so much that's already been elevated. Just some of the thoughts and reflections just upon hearing, one, for us in North Carolina, we are looking at a couple of different things. We've had recently Senate bills introduced that has set the precedence of a potential of actually punishing any city or county that would dare touch the police budget. And so our General Assembly has said that if they reduce the police budget by even as much as 1%, that they'll withhold tax dollars that is owed to the city and county. And then that was followed by a second Senate bill. And that one's 300. The first one's 100, but Senate Bill 300 lays out their plan to begin training officers and law enforcement, including sheriff's associations. But of course, it's using the language from the movement last year. But when you look at the body of the bill, of course, it doesn't hold any girth of like upping the actual requirements of, minimum hours of training required, what curriculums would be followed, transparency. And of course, they snuck in provisions of increasing our protest to a felony class H, and then for youth, a felony class G, which would require 16 and 17-year-olds to go to adult court. And so that's the legislature that we've had to deal with for the past 10 plus years due to gerrymanders. And so, of course, we're looking at this intersection, right, of our communities, looking at the ability for law enforcement in our state to be strengthened and emboldened by legislators that can't be voted out. And so when we're looking at the entrenchment of that power, we're also having to take in consideration how are we strategizing and reimagining safety that is also
readdressing the fact that redistricting is a constitutional amendment that means only the legislature can draw maps, we can't. And of course, we know that the legislature is not going to vote against itself. But the fact that they are strong arming us and punishing the community for saying we want community peacekeepers, we want licensed social workers, we want licensed psychologists in our communities, and this is what this would look like, right? Even replacement to SROs, and your immediate response is, we will withhold resources to your local elected officials, even alienates our ability as constituents to even work in tandem with our local elected leaders, especially in the middle of a pandemic, the strain on COVID-19. And so that's some of the hurdles that we're dealing with, in addition to wanting and demanding police have to, and law enforcement overall, be required to carry insurance. If we have any mark on our insurance as it relates to a DUI or other, a misdeed, we'll have points racked against us. And the fact that our law enforcement isn't required to hold insurance to that same degree, and instead our tax dollars are being covered, our tax dollars are used to cover law enforcement, goes again to the lack of really democracy when we can't say we want our money to go. And so those are some of the elements, but then I just reflect on, and Robert John, I really appreciated your comments because it makes me reflect on the Black codes. This is how this was created to be. It is working exactly how it's supposed to work. And so when we think about the terms of plantation has been replaced with corporation. And so slavery was then transformed into Black codes, and you had the slave patrols, and the same laws that has been embedded in our constitutional amendments was there. And the folks who enforced that constitutional change, that didn't change for us, it just changed to say that we could still be enslaved if we were arrested or found for a crime. And so who was the enforcement of such, egregious constitutional amendment that didn't really say we were free? It was free with conditions. It was police. And then that's what makes me think is we haven't overhauled, we haven't dismantled, and we think about just everyday life, and it's gaslighting. It's abusive for our communities to have to convince this nation that the system that it's built is doing exactly what's intended to do, yet we're shamed as it's being too progressive. No, you're gaslighting us. The reality is, even when you have a car, this is a very simple analogy, we know at some point it'll need an oil change. And at some point it won't run anymore and you'll need a replacement. We have been in the same car with police for over 100 years. At what point do we get a new vehicle? At what point do we overhaul? And at what point do we address these constitutional amendments that emboldens sheriff's departments without any retribution? So even when we look at police, that's in the media right now, that's true. But what about our sheriff's department, who are considered gods? Not to be blasphemous, but they're considered that way in rural areas where they're not checked because they're in the Constitution and they answer to no one. And so that's just some of the things that's been heavy on us, but definitely heavy on my heart, and have appreciated the dialogue because I couldn't agree more with everything that's already been stated, especially Dr. Martin, when you were talking about in the chat around require social, not law enforcement solutions. You're exactly right. The fact that we have been defunded and not actually given support for mental health. We haven't been given support for our children who should have the support in foster care in a way that's equitable and whole and a just transition. Instead, they're policed from school all the way through adulthood. And so we just see that path. And again, just have appreciate the dialogue.
Absolutely. Dr. Martin. Unmute.
Well, yeah, sorry. Well, I think it was actually Robert who started that whole line of thought about refunding or transforming the funding of the police. And I'm one of the people who complains about the mantra of defund the police, because I think it's a miscommunication. It's unclear. I think it turns a lot of people off because they see law enforcement as protective of them and protective of their property. I know, strangely enough, and I will sound completely out of place, I grew up trusting the police. I was always trained to, go to a law enforcement officer if you had a problem. That sounds almost insane somehow now, but that's how I was raised as a child. And I never even thought about being unsafe around law enforcement. And I'm realizing now that my narrative has become unusual somehow. But the law enforcement officer, I was told, was there to protect and serve me, that I was, I'm a citizen, I have entitlements, I should expect this service. And if I don't get it, then there is a modus for complaining. You get the badge number, you go through the complaint office within the police structure, or if something is a direct encounter, you get through the encounter, you go into court, and you make you state your grievances in the courtroom setting. But the point is, do our societies give a clear idea of what policing needs to be doing, what a law enforcement officer is supposed to be doing? They've become dumping grounds for things that often law enforcement officers simply are not qualified to do. And so some of the funds would need to be restructured. So you have everything that was described by these knee-jerk responses of legislatures. It's all a part of this odd, sick, punitive sensibility of trying to damage someone else. That whole discourse has to be shifted. And the people who are being directly affected by the negative impact of that will probably have to end up being, and it's always the marginalized group that has to try to do the transformation. But some new form of discourse has to be presented into the discussions with law enforcement. And that's why I was saying direct engagement. So when we talk to police officers who are just human beings who have some minimal amount of training or X amount of service, which in some cases may have jaded them in their interactions with human beings so that they can't see people anymore, and don't have the support often within their profession to help them, we have to see them first, maybe, and start the discourse and work directly sometimes with your local sheriff's department, with your city municipal policing office. Get to know them and have a presence. I think that could be a start, and get them to advocate also for the changes that you would help them recognize they need, because the police need these changes themselves. I don't think any sensible law enforcement officer wants to just go around randomly murdering people. That is just, it's counterproductive to your profession. It's dangerous and it's stupid, among most importantly. So there would be, I'm thinking, in most police departments, a reasonable intention to welcome constructive input. So the problem is, making it constructive and engaging with them, creating the mechanisms to engage.
So I have a little thought about that, some insight from my community work. One is, how do you say it? So even in my own evolution, growing up on NWA and after police, and just the black masculinity armor that in some ways I felt like I had to wear. One of the tenets of that is to have no police interaction, period. It doesn't matter what the nature of the interaction is. You have zero conversation, nothing. I think if y'all remember the no snitching kind of interview with Cameron, and they were saying, well, I forgot Anderson Cooper. He's asking him like, what is a serial murder and all that. And Cameron was like, well, I might move, but I'm not going to the police. I ain't gonna tell them anything. And it basically was like, there's nothing to say to a police officer that, all right, how's your day, officer? How can I help you? Here's my license, here's my, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it would be challenging for somebody in that kind of space where they have to navigate the neighborhood. There's a lot of the discomfort that comes with being seen as just talking to a police officer, just because of the street code. It could put people in harm's way. So I think that makes the conversation difficult at that level. Certainly, when in almost 99% of the communities I work in a lot of high poverty areas, high crime areas. The surface issue is with the police. And then when you peel it back, it's the elixir of poverty, of homelessness, of like all these things that are driving crime, which is increasing the police presence there. And then to your point, all these other resources that people need in these communities, and they're not the people that do that work. So there's just so many like levels to it. I've often heard you say, Dr. Martin, that they're still, because they have the power of the gun and the badge, that they still have a higher moral responsibility. So I certainly still agree with that. I think the people who are organizers on the ground, who can have the conversations and maybe be the intermediary between the community and the police, or just other resource providers who can be in kind of that circle of transformation. I think everybody would have to play their position. And then I don't want to hog the floor. What I've seen since Ferguson, for me, the marker of time, there's been things before that, and you could say Rodney King, but I feel like video-wise, the first video that really kind of struck me was Fruitvale Station, and Oscar Grant. So that's what, 2009 sometime. And then kind of the next, there'd been other things, but the next kind of landmark BLM episode was Trayvon Martin and the Zimmerman verdict. And then here's a guy who was told by the police to stand down, did it anyway, got beat up, so he killed Trayvon Martin. But the it's like Denzel saying, training day, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. So he used the stand your ground law to, come out on top. And he's at gun shows and signing Skittles bags, and it's just, a whole mess there. Certainly Ferguson, I think, was the most transformative national situation that I can really recall up to Chauvin, this past week, or all these kind of markers in between. But just all that to say is how I would like to challenge maybe organizers who can be that intermediary in those spaces to definitely do it to the fullest. But I think what happens is there's a national episode, or if it happens here, wherever it happens, the organizers got to stay at it. It's like we can't wait until the next hashtag. You have to stay on the front line of that in-between work, and not all it. I think the protests and going to the State House and things like that, to me, that's where you promote your platform to other people who you want to onboard. You certainly got to have a vetting system to bring those people in with clear tasks of like, this is what we need you to do. You need to call the police, network wise. We have a racial profiling bill, all cops, all stops. So it's like taking advantage of the tools that are out there. But I think it just comes down to being relentless and insisting on the change no matter what, while still maintaining your humanity and rest. Because like I said, being around this traumatic energy all the time with no time out, with no self-care, with no getaway, no vacation, it's going to eventually manifest in your body in some capacity. So I just wanted to put that kind of feeling into the circle.
Well, just two things. Also, being well informed is helpful, because you cited the George Zimmerman Trayvon Martin incident, where George Zimmerman was not convicted because of stand your ground laws. Well, in Ohio, where Makia Brandt was, there's the stand your ground law. Why didn't it apply to her? As a question to bring out those disparities. That's a responsibility for progressive action for people who are trying to open the discourse. The other thing is, there is no reason to assume that police or law enforcement agencies have any idea of how to improve the situation for themselves, because they're in tunnels. They're in a kind of, they're in the culture that exists for what they do. And you're actually doing them a favor to bring information to them that's outside of the way that they ordinarily would think about engaging with the public. So in that sense, as citizens, if we have better ideas, it was what you said about having a duty to act. That's a duty.
All right, any other thoughts?
Omari, this is Chris. I was going to say something. One of the points that Dr. Martin brought up that is very true is in organizing and wanting to see change. We can, and sorry, I'm walking. We can't forget that, as he said, law enforcement or their span of operation, it has just become a dumping ground. You know, you have lawmakers that have decentralized so many state resources, such as mental health, child care, different things like that. And law enforcement have to go into these situations. So it's two-pronged. We have to address the fact that the states or themselves or the local governments have to provide funding for a lot of these programs to help people, to help humanity be more productive or be better, just in general. And the other thing with law enforcement is that I agree with what he said. All of the same dynamics that we have to deal with out on the street are the same things that happen within their workplaces. Like I said earlier, it's so much discrimination or segregation on so many levels. You have women issues or unfair treatment towards women that's in law enforcement, race, religion, all of these things play a part in that dynamic of that work group. So when we see these things play out, we have to realize that there's still ongoing things inside of that profession that manifest themselves out in the public, as we've seen in Chauvin's case, where, you know, the moral compass appeared not to be there, but, you know, is a reflection of that chain of command, or that, okay, he's allowed to get away with this and we're not going to say anything because we don't want to be blackballed. Those are two big things we have to focus on, is that law enforcement community has become a big dumping ground. I know in corrections, we have to deal with a huge mental health population. And what has the state of South Carolina done? They've decentralized mental health, closed down the state hospital, and essentially said whoever comes or whoever, whatever mental health patients don't have that family support, if they get in trouble on the street or they can't handle them anymore as part of the homeless population, they put them inside a prison, whether they know why they're in there or not. They're inside of the prison system. And then now you have the correctional officer, in this case with minimal, you know, a lot of times coming in with minimal education, minimal experience, and they're having to tag on another duty. That duty of now being part mental health professional, part law enforcement, part de-escalator, part, you know, and it creates this dynamic where, as we're talking about now, at some point, something is going to explode. Because you don't have the training, you don't have, and the reason a lot of these professions are because they're, at the end of the day, the employee is saying, I didn't sign up for all this. I didn't know all of this was a part of the job. So you have retention issues, and then you have situations as what has happened with, you know, with Chauvin, is you have these big explosions of bad practices within the profession. So we have to start educating. We have to start showing that, you know, showing that support, and accountability is a big thing. When everybody was talking, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement and all that, you know, in my heart, I'm always saying yes, because that is actually showing, that's pushing people to be accountable. I think, you know, so many professions, the lack of accountability in upholding certain practices, you know, it's just not there. You have so much in black and white, so many rules and regulations when you come in that you're taught. But at the end of the day, it's like, well, they got all of that in writing, but nobody really follows that. And that's a leadership challenge. That's a cultural, as Dr. Martin said, it has to be a cultural shift. These things don't happen overnight. So in the immediate time frame, you know, organizations such as all of you that are that you all manage on this call, it calls for that public accountability, and we have to continue that for these professions. All the while, we have to recognize that there's additional training, there's additional support that's needed locally in these law enforcement communities, and then we have to hold these lawmakers accountable to providing and funding the resources that they should be funding within these communities to change the systemic problems that we've been dealing with for years and years and years. And I'm going to stop there, but I really appreciate this conversation tonight.
No, absolutely. An invitation or something that I'd like to try to figure out is maybe doing a part 2 of the 5.0 conversation that I had with the museum. We were able to get Deputy Chief and another officer, and just listening to everybody. I'm just aware of all of these kind of politics around expansion of services and just action steps that we could possibly take, or what the roadblocks are. And I'd like for everybody in the circle to be able to talk directly with people and tell them what, you know, we all believe those solutions are. Sitting on 8 o'clock, I did want to at least check in with everybody around any other kind of conversation or dialogue, or just something that we wanted to put in the circle. As far as, you know, like I said, there have been 147 mass shootings, and, you know, we can just go on and on with the isms that are happening. So I did want to make a space for that. And then as we kind of wind down, if folks have toolboxes, resources, an action plan, or just any of those kind of sentiments that we want to leave with, you know, certainly do that at the checkout. So I will start by saying definitely get connected with the network. We have a racial justice project that's kind of centered around the racial profiling bills, you know, also called All Cops, All Stops. So there's an opportunity to expand, you know, this dialogue. But I just think with the nature and the energy that's going on in the country, there's certainly other aspects of racial justice, and it's certainly not all about African Americans, and it never was. So there's just definitely an opportunity there to onboard and kind of expand some IQ and action steps around what justice looks like, and as far as racism goes. We also have, well, Vince isn't on the call, but kind of stay tuned for what Fair Maps and the redistricting conversation is gonna look like. So we definitely have some direction that we'd like for our allies and friends to take on that move. I know some of the people in the circle are in Majeska School and loving it, loving the history, and then we usually close those sessions out with kind of a, you know, public commentary, just bread breaking session about, you know, anything we want to vibe on. So look out for special programming that comes out of the Majeska School, like alternative lessons and such. And a little more heightened around election seasons and things like that. We have election protection hotlines, and missing voter project, where you actually get to study county by county, the inactive voters registered, all the demographics by race, you know, and such. So it's actually really fascinating to be able to take deep dives at that level. But we really want to expand our platform of offerings or support, you know, things that are important to the public. So if there's any way or any issues that anybody wants to lift up, and we can have dialogue or town halls or what have you, you know, certainly let us know so we can support you in elevating those conversations. So that is my Springer thought of the day kind of exit. But I wanted to give, I guess since we're down to 9, if just folks wanted to just give a check out, let us know how you're feeling as you, the individual, the person, your humanity, but certainly offer any action steps, plans, or ways that we could stay connected and support your advocacy. And I see Rick, so I'll pass it to Rick.
There's a deep dive on Monday from one of the classes in the Majeska School, and I can't remember right now what it's about. But on Monday there is a deep dive. I think that it's the history. It's I believe a history professor, but I'm drawing a blank. But anyways, there is something going on, a deep dive on Monday, if you check with the network.
Is it Bobby Donaldson?
No.
No.
I gotta look it up. But I guess if folks are interested, we can probably get you a guest pass if you're not already in the class, and you can just kind of participate in. You certainly wouldn't turn anybody away. So shoot me an email. I'll put it in the chat, and we can make that happen. But thanks for lifting that up, Rick. Sister April, you'd like to shout out BBM or do a checkout? You doing good over there? I know you got to still doing your work, but are you good?
Yeah, just want to again just say I appreciate having the opportunity to listen. You definitely echo the sentiments. BVM right now, what we're really gearing towards is getting the information and the word out about a lot of this legislation, especially when we're talking about, reforms at the same time. We've got, bills that are up that would make it illegal for us to basically vocalize our displeasure, to assemble and to demonstrate and to protest. So making sure that our communities are aware of that so we can make our voices heard. So just been trying to promote hearings. There are also a lot of, positive voting bills happening. And that's really our focus right now, is just trying to get people geared up to lobby around legislation as the best way that we can. But definitely as these conversations move forward and we start talking about the kind of policies that we want to see in the state, just looking forward to being a part of that. And it's always a pleasure. I'm currently a Majesco School student and just want to, lift up SC Pronet for that opportunity, learning a lot. But again, thank you for letting me be in this space. And it definitely makes moments like these easier when you realize that you're not by yourself and there are people out here that are, co-conspirators. So I appreciate you all so much.
Absolutely, that we are. I will pass it to my co-chair, the C4. Carol, any closing thoughts? Check out.
As I stated, I came to listen and I heard a lot. And I basically disagree with what everyone said. I guess I have a sentiment that, and I think someone echoed this, is training is not the answer, not just another 2-week, 3-week training. If you can't change the heart of a person, or if it's not in their heart to change, it's just very difficult. And one of the things that someone I heard recently, as they were talking about the incident in Virginia, how it just escalated because the lieutenant would not follow orders. And so, it's like, I give you an order. It doesn't matter how ludicrous it is, you have to follow it because I say so. And it's through those things that when people think that way, I'm not sure how training helps them. But there were a lot of things that were said that I really agree with. That the community policing and knowing your community, I think that is so important. And I think they were saying that in Minnesota that none of those persons lived in that area, that the police. So it's just a lot. And I think it's going to be more than just policing that we have to deal with. And I'm not sure where to start. And I certainly don't know where it's going to end, but this has been real informative for me.
Thanks for joining the circle. I will give Tom a chance to check out. You got anything on your heart and mind?
Thank you for having this discussion. I think a lot of useful things have been said. I don't think there's any one key to unlock this problem. There are a number of things that have to be done, and they have to coordinate together effectively, and it's going to take a long time. I think part of the solution is making sure that people who should not be on police forces don't get in. I remember as a teacher, we had a an in-service meeting, and a deputy sheriff came and he described a number of problems that were related to law enforcement. And he said, one of the problems is you can be very careful about picking students for a police academy, very careful about training them. And some of those people, when they get out, as soon as they get a badge on their chest and a gun on their hip, start acting like little dictators. So I think there are certain people who, with that kind of personality, who are attracted to police forces because they feel they can push people around, and they should never be there to begin with. I understand in Germany they have high standards for police training, and in spite of the high standards and the amount of time, they still have more applicants than they can absorb, which means they can pick and choose the people who are actually admitted to the police forces. So I think this is going to take us a long time to solve, but we have to keep a number of problems in mind and a number of solutions and figure out which ones work best. It's going to take time, and we also have to communicate widely with the public. If the public expects high standards, we're more likely to get it. And the public also has to understand the problems, and that's a big education problem, reaching large numbers of the public effectively.
I appreciate that, Tom. I have a request for Robert John before you check out. I've heard you say it twice now, but I want to make sure I get your verbiage right. But you said something to the effect of the way that people show up, like how people could come, and it's just a certain like language that you use with that. If you could repeat that, and then just give your checkout.
Omari, I say so many brilliant things, I can't recall what I said at that point. No, real talk. I'm not sure. I can't recall what it was, but I do talk about people coming unfinished and broke with their broken edges, in that in our work, we don't need conformity. We want you to come as you are, your holistic self. We don't like vanilla, we like it kinky. So that's kind of how I share that piece. But yeah, for my checkout, I 100% appreciate this space. I appreciate being in principal struggle and having to push back. Like with Dr. Martin, I think you're right. Defund the police may sound a certain way, but hope and change sounded a certain way. Cease weather sounded a certain way. And people said, you can't say cease weather because it doesn't make sense. But yes, we can. And I think what happens is that language is powerful. The linguistics that we utilize means, words matter. So I think we literally mean take money from the police. In my world vision, there would be no police. And I have a lot of ways of how we can talk about how that would happen and how we can make it happen. And there are places that have made it happen. I've lived in places that didn't have police outside of the United States. So I feel like there is ways, models that we can talk about and figure out, but that resources, should go into our communities. And I believe that, and I believe that there is a possibility for liberation in our lifetime. And it takes us to make it happen. And that we do get caught up in these silos. So that's why I appreciate principal struggle, because I want to be challenged and I want to be forced to think about it in other ways, and I can come to other conclusions because I'm human and flexible. But I'm down to kind of figure that out. And I think what our next steps are, that we know there's going to be continual sanctioned violence from the state, that we have to be prepared as a community to hold each other in our spiritual ways and our physical ways, to be part of the beloved community. Like, this is where we were tasked to do by our ancestors, is to create beloved community. So I'm down for that. And I think there's lots of ways we can figure it out, especially I think for me, it's always going to come down to gerrymandering, especially for South Carolina. We'll get into it in Majestica, as I'm a student there too, but so much relies on our 1895 Constitution, and there's so many ways that we could disrupt that system. So I'm all about that in direct action. I'm all about, and there's prime examples when that dude, the military army guy, harassed that young Black dude on the street. You know, the community didn't call the police. They showed up at his house. They did a press conference. They did it in shifts. And then the police were forced to make a statement. The army was forced to make a statement. And this person had to flee his home because he was afraid. But it was a community organizing outside of the police structure, and it doesn't always work. And there are times where we have to figure it out. But I didn't grow up told to call the police. We were told not to ever call the police, to always have an ID, make eye contact, nod, and keep it moving. So I have a different relationship with police. I've also been somebody who's been incarcerated, so I have a relationship with there too. So I come from a different perspective, but I 100% am talking too much, but would say I love this space. I'm down for this space and want to continue having our conversations of how we figure out to keep ourselves safe and how we figure out to have less police in our communities.
I appreciate you, Robert. I will pass it to Krista. I think we're Facebook friends now. I'm remembering your Rural SC project. If you could tell us what that is and give us your checkout.
The rules. First, I want to say thank you for inviting me. And the Rural South Carolina project is a project that seeks to empower underrepresented voters in rural and underserved communities in South Carolina. And I heard the gerrymandering and redistricting and reapportionment. That is something that is on the table now. That is the next big project that the Rural Project is going to be getting into. And we're going to be working with some representatives from the Progressive Network that are in Myrtle Beach, Randy German, and also Moms Demand Action with gun violence that's in our community. So the Rural Project is jumping on board with those democracy issues and getting them out to the community and educating as many people, because as you all said, it's through the education of these issues that we empower our people to be able to say, hey, we can stand up and we can fight for what's right. We can hold the necessary individuals accountable. And I like what I think Robert just said, that action of what happened with the soldier. Maybe nothing would have been done if the community did not organize and say, hey, we want something done about this. And a lot of times, because these systems have been in place for so long, and because of the situation we have in South Carolina with certain groups being dominant in the House and the Senate and things like that, they just get away with things. And I'm a state employee, so I see this firsthand. And a lot of times the only way to disrupt those systems is to take a stand against it, a bold stand. So I really appreciate this conversation, and everybody out there, just continue doing what you're doing because I believe through that we're moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining, and thanks for collaborating with our Horry County crew out there for sure. I'm going to pass it to the Zoom czar, who shall remain nameless, but I think the Zoom czar should say something represented by SC Progressive Network in the title. Zoom czar, go. And that's indifference shown by the Zoom czar. So we say we want a beloved community, then when he has the floor, he doesn't want to share the love. So I will pass it to my mentor, who give us the truth. I try to give a spring of closing, but my real talk on Dr. Martin is my mentor for 30 years now. So we call him the Sentinel. Some people call him Google. I appreciate what I learned from him is that we can argue and without like finger pointing, and I can have my view, you can have yours, but I think iron sharpens each other, so we can all chisel each other to get to the higher place. And I feel like that happened tonight. So Dr. Frank C. Martin, take us home.
Well, I think first I'd like to offer appreciation for the conversation, for the wonderful differing points of view that I've heard. And human beings are able to communicate for a reason, and they have a rational faculty for a reason. So we are creatures that are designed to solve problems and to exchange information. So that's a big deal. When we stop doing that, or when we fall short of doing that, then we have lots of problems and issues. And I'm very grateful for Robert's comments, or Robert John, sorry, put both those names in there. Robert John's comments in particular. And right now I'm distracted because I'm thinking about the situation with the military man, I can't remember his name, Bentley Brantley, who accosted the young African-American in the neighborhood, who was from the neighborhood, but who may himself have been aggravating women and children in that neighborhood. And so the military guy may have been called to assist somebody. All of that's still unclear. I don't know. I didn't follow up on the outcomes. I know that people did demonstrate in front of his house. But all of this is about completeness of information. It's about recognizing the humanity of others. It's about someone who was trained to be a defender going into defense mode when he was intoxicated in part. So as human beings, we're full of flaws. And I think it's unrealistic to think we're going to solve certain kinds of things. We can mitigate the circumstances, we can open discourse, we can improve things. And I think that may often end up being our goal. And I think a good direction would be to have another conversation with law enforcement and with legislators in the conversation, if possible, not to let them dominate the conversation, but to expose them to different ways of thinking about the problem, because that's how you can get different ideas into a discourse. And they need to hear, Robert John, they need to hear, is it Christian? I forgot. They just need to hear these differing voices and assess the problems differently, because the nature of the problem is always in a transitional state. So as soon as you solve a problem, you get a new problem. That's just how it is. We have to get used to it. We have to make peace with process. And with that said, I think that what people don't recognize is that having a conversation is itself an action. And that's the beginning to do any further action, to think about it adequately. And that's it for me. Dialectics, yes. Who is the Progressive Network? Is that who I think it is? Who's
That's me,
behind it?
Doc.
Who is
If you
Right,
said dialectic, you know who it is.
that Daniel?
It is Daniel.
Why
I
didn't
did.
you speak? But anyway,
It's only right that you put some syllables in this conversation, Daniel. Say something, man.
yeah, you got to come out, Daniel. Come on.
You can say it off camera. You got to say something, bro.
Two things to be true in an opposition. Yes, exactly, Robert John. Yes. Daniel's not going to talk. We'll have an
Yeah, I
after
guess
discourse with
we
Daniel.
we clearly can't get along then. All right. All right. Shout outs to BBM. Shout outs to Rural South Carolina Project. Robert John, everybody in the circle. Thank you for your presence. Your presence is a blessing. And yeah, take some time for your humanity. It's been a crazy year, week, century and such, but let's maybe deliberately think about our positives and where our blessings are and where our beloved community is in those spaces where we can fall back to our humanity so that we can go back into the work refreshed and stronger than ever. So that is my closer. Peace and love, and hope to see y'all all in Jessica Monday, and then stay tuned for our next town hall. Appreciate your presence. Yeah,
Peace and
outta here.
lovings, y'all. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Night, night.